Welcome, everyone, to the What's and Whys of Persona Development. My name is Doña Mariano Ruiz de Medina, and thank you so much for joining me. So this class is going to cover 4 main areas within persona development. Submit B again. What is persona? How do I choose a persona? What can I do to make my persona more real to me? And what can I do to bring my persona more actively into the SCA? So let's start with what is persona? Persona is the structure by which you define the area, time period, and role of the person you play as in the SCA. In reality, what that means is for a lot of people, it's often their name, the thing they are the most interested in, and sometimes how they interact with different SCA functions. For the SCA as a whole, all we ask is an attempt at a person from up to the year 1600, and that's a little iffy. Some people will fudge it down to 1650. Here, I like to remind everybody, there is no start date to the SCA. There are people doing some really fantastic work in the Bronze Age and Iron Age, all the way up to that 1650 marker. So anything before that date is fair game. Usually this includes your name and to some extent your garb. What is persona not? Persona is not restrictive, meaning you do not have to only play to that one persona. You can choose to do only the things that your persona would, but you definitely don't have to. Using persona as a guide for exploring new things can be really fun and a powerful form of encouragement, but you are not limited in how you interact with the SCA by your persona. Persona is not immutable. You are not permanently bound to one persona for all time in the SCA. I'll use myself as an example here. I started off playing 16th century English primarily. My name was registered as Marion Compton. And then during the pandemic, I met my Laurel, B, fell in love with Spain, and now I'm Mariana, the 15th century Spanish woman. You are not stuck in one persona your entire time in the SCA. Your persona does not have to be static, even. Your persona can and should grow over time as you do as a person. Some people have multiple personae, transcending names, time periods, geographic location, and gender presentations. Some people will have a male presenting persona, a female presenting persona, however they're feeling that day. We'll get into this a little bit more later in the presentation, but persona is not a determination of your value in the SCA either. You are not a better Scadian for being perfectly in persona at all times, nor are you a worse Scadian for doing so as well. And last but not least, persona is not a specific person in history. The College of Heralds has this concept called presumption that I find really helpful here. And that is defined as presumption is a false claim of restricted rank or powers that the submitter does not possess within the society or that we do not allow anybody to claim. It also includes claim of identity or relationship with a person outside the SCA who is considered quite important by many people within and outside the society. And the TLDR there is that you cannot be Elizabeth I or her secret love child. So before I dive into how do you choose a persona, are there any questions? No? Okay, we're good then. So how do you choose a persona? There are a couple of different ways I think about persona as a whole, and that falls into the 2 buckets of culture-driven and mission-driven. Culturally driven can mean any of these things. Again, I'll use my persona as an example. My persona is 15th century Castilian, which is a geographic region and a specific time period. She comes from a converso family, which is an ethno-religious driver. I also chose this partially because I speak Spanish, which is a linguistic driver for choosing this particular persona. Or you can have something that's more mission-driven. An occupation, meaning somebody whose persona is built around their job, like a forestry guild. Is there a particular style of fashion that you just really, really like, or are particularly comfortable with? Or is your household or your chosen family a group of specific personas? A great example here is the Pensick Janissary Band. While not all of them derive their persona from their role in the Janissary Band, a lot of them do. And if you wanted to be a part of the Janissary Band, you would probably be seriously considering Ottoman Turkish as your persona. And when it's time to start thinking about choosing your persona, I like to present this as a series of questions, because this should be something you're thinking in depth about and thinking about more critically, I think. The opening questions tend to be the lighter, easier stuff. Do you have a specific area of interest? Thinking back to literature, media, experiences you've had in your life, etc., that have been interesting and engaging to you. Finding something you want to actually put effort into is kind of the driving force behind all of these questions, but this one in particular, because you want something that is going to hold your attention. That said, try stuff before committing. So if you think you might be interested in English, give that a go. But if something comes along, like Spanish, and happens to capture your attention, give that a try too. You do not have to pigeonhole yourself at this particular stage. Do you have a specific art, science, or fighting form that you want to pursue as your activity in the SCA? A great example of this one is Naranbanj, the Mongolian archer, former Baron of Ponte Alto, who is really, really into archery, and in doing so, found his way to Mongolia and got a laurel in his Mongolian archery presentation. Another great example is Edric the Potter, who is a phenomenal period potter and has really built a story around his persona and that pottery work. Is there an influence from your mundane life that you want to connect to further? So my first persona, Marion Compton, came about because of my paternal grandmother, whose maiden name was Compton and was really interested in genealogy and tracked our family history on that side of the family all the way back to England in our time period. So Marion herself was from the place that our family was from in England in that time period. Mariana comes not just from my love of Spain and interest in Spanish culture and language, but also because it's a really great way to interact with Judaism within the SCA. The next thing I like to touch on before we get into the more in-depth questions is what I like to call an aha moment, which is, in my mind, the starting point of why you want to go for a specific persona. This could be a lot of different things. It could be art, it could be a book, it could be, again, literature, media, life experiences, an activity you really like in the SCA, but finding something that kind of clicks for you and gives you a place to start, okay, if I want to achieve this thing, how do I have to get there? How does that persona end up happening? A quick trigger warning here. I will be showing a painting in the next slide that has some violence and blood in it. If you would like to close the screen and not view that, I will let you know when I have gone past that particular piece of art. We'll give everybody a second. Okay. This is my aha moment. This is a painting of the beheading of St. John the Baptist by Juan de Segovia. It was painted in Burgos in 1490 to 1500. And the thing in this picture that got me is her shirt. I love her shirt. I desperately want her shirt. I'm still working on making that happen. But seeing this painting and getting to see it at its particular museum listing and like really diving into the embroidery pattern that's on there, this was the thing that, like, yes, I want to do it. The hat I'm wearing today is actually a prototype of her hat here. But finding something that you really connect with, like a garment in a painting or something like that, can be a really great building block for you to grow your persona from. For anybody who chose to hide their screen, we are now away from the possibly triggering piece of artwork. But here is where we get into the digging deeper questions. And these are the places where you're really going to want to start critically thinking about your persona. Why do you want to develop a persona in general is a great place to start. Thinking about what do you think persona is going to add to your SCA experience can be very powerful for helping people figure out what do they want to do with that persona later on. How do you expect to apply persona to your SCA life? And this is where I want to talk about a Laurel out of Callantyre. His name is Hugo van Harlo. And he has a 5-point scale that I really, really like. It starts off with here for a good time, which is a name and an attempt at garb. Then you've got rudimentary persona concept, which is general culture or time, and a name is appropriate for that culture or time. Your garb might be. The third kind of rung on that ladder is a foundational functional persona, which is, time, place, name, garb, and some sort of kit that matches that one main concept. And you're starting to get more into the historical context at this point. Next is in-depth research-driven persona. Deeper research into real understanding of your persona and their historical context, and using persona as a tool to connect to your SCA experience on a more regular and deeper basis. This is kind of where I like to aim for. I know for a fact that I will never hit perfectly historically accurate because I have neither the time nor the will to spend that much time hunting for stuff on the internet to buy. That's just not my deal. But knowing that I can use my persona to inform a lot of parts of my SCA experience is one of the more comforting parts of persona to me. And lastly, you've got persona as a literary construct. This is a fully fledged fictional character with plausible life details. Very few, if anybody, achieves this. And to go back to our earlier point in this slideshow, none of these different ways of interacting with persona are any more or less valuable than an alternative. Here for a good time is just as important to the SCA as persona as a literary construct, and I really want to emphasize that particular point. The next question is, why this persona? And we're going to camp here for a little bit because this question has a couple of important considerations. This may be the most important question you ask yourself in the process of developing your persona. This is where you need to consider cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. So Merriam-Webster defines cultural appropriation as the unacknowledged or inappropriate adoption of the customs, practices, ideas, etc. of one people or society by members of another and typically more dominant people or society. Are you portraying a marginalized culture without acknowledging that marginalization? Are you treating ritual practices and items respectfully? Are you respecting the boundaries of closed practices? And what this really comes down to is, do not wear somebody's culture as a Halloween costume. Portray other cultures with respect, with research, and when someone points out to you that you may be doing harm in your portrayal, it's really important to learn and grow from it. So again, I will throw myself on this sword. I'm a mundanely Ashkenazi Jewish woman who portrays a woman of Sephardic descent. The concept of Ashkenormativity means that a lot of people in America and Western culture as a whole think all Jews look like I do. I have dark curly hair, I have white passing skin. A lot of people think that I am what Jews look like. That's not true. There are as many different kinds of Jewish practice and cultures and people in this world as there are Jews. But just because I benefit from the conditional whiteness of Ashkenormativity does not mean that I can ignore the fact that many other Jewish people do not have that privilege. And my persona is one of those people. Mariana would probably have had a challenging time passing for non-Jewish if she didn't put a lot of very concerted effort into it. There are a lot of people who may not feel safe in portraying identities like that for a variety of both period and modern reasons. So knowing that my portrayal of my persona does cross a line to making sure that I know that when I am appreciating another culture versus appropriating it is really important. This is also where we need to start thinking about some of the darker parts of history. We cannot separate the cultures of the past from some of the atrocities also committed in that past. When dealing with your chosen culture, are you acknowledging respectfully and dealing with the pieces of that culture that may be harmful to modern people? Are you able to acknowledge harms done and how your persona may have interacted with them? So examples from our period. In the later part of the SCA period is where we really see the ramping up of the exploitation of the global South. And as a Spanish persona, I know for a fact that I would have benefited from that exploitation. Knowing how my persona would have felt or thought about the rights and treatment of enslaved peoples in our time is a really important way of acknowledging that those harms did happen. Slightly post-period, thinking about the systemic persecution of cultural minorities, like the near extinction of Scots Gaelic culture. Again, slightly post our period, but it's an example that a lot of people are very familiar with. Religious persecutions like the expulsion from Spain, which wasn't really apologized for by the Catholic Church until the year 2000. There are a lot of parts of the histories that we deal with that may be uncomfortable to sit with and think about, but it's really important when you're choosing persona to give those space and allow them to both be present in the process and inform you as a modern reenactor better. So now that I have completely ruined the mood, do we have any questions so far? If somebody is speaking, I cannot hear you.
Nothing from chat so far.
Wonderful. So now we talk about bringing persona to life. And there are two sections or kind of concepts in my brain of how I think about persona as something I actually do. This first one is the more internal bits of this. The how do I bring Mariana to life for me? And this is where we see a lot of research, the doing, the thinking, the processing. The socio-political context, what is happening in the world around your persona? If you have chosen a specific time range, what are the major events in that year or time range? Who is in power in your area? So for my persona, I play mid to late 15th century primarily, and sometimes dip my toes into the 16th century, which means Isabella and Fernando are in power for most of that in Spain, followed by their daughter Juana, and then her son Carlos. Major events are the Reconquista, so the reconquering of Spain from the Moors, the expulsion of the Jews and the Moors, the voyages of Christopher Columbus and the Treaty of Tordesillas, and the alliance and later failed marriage of La Infanta Catalina to Henry VIII. Religious context. How would your persona interact with religion and religious institutions? This is a hard one to escape in SCA period. I would almost argue it is an inescapable concept in persona development. No matter where in the world you choose your persona, in our period, religion, spiritualism, religious institutions were pervasive and play a huge role in how people just exist on a day-to-day basis. It's hard to understate how much of an influence that some of these institutions and practices had. Whether or not you yourself are a believer in those institutions or practices, acknowledging their effect on your persona and some of the more intangible ways that that happens, like how you make food decisions, etc., can be a really interesting way of contextualizing some of the more esoteric parts of persona. Familial structure. What does your persona's family look like? How does it relate to the familial structures that you use in the SCA? Who would have been in charge and or responsible for your persona? Who does your persona look to for protection? And how can you bring some of those familial structures or experiences into your SCA play? A great example here is I'm going to call out B's class on widowhood and how marriage affects the legal rights of women in Spain. Education. Does your persona have an education? To what extent are they educated? What kind of education do they have? Are they apprenticed in a trade? Have they gone to seminary? Have they gone to university? What education systems are very prevalent? So for my persona, the big one to think about is the change from classical medieval style education to the humanist movement and how that affects thinking about education. For women, would your female persona, female presenting persona, or anybody who wishes to present a female persona, would that female presenting persona have been educated? And how does that differ from a male presenting persona's education from the same time period? It can be a fascinating subject. Finding resources. I'm once again going to recommend Hugo van Harlo. I believe I have his website and handouts linked in the handout for this class. But I really like his system of walking through specific questions. And then for persona specific resources, I'm gonna go with my 3 Ls, Laurel's, libraries, and literature. As I have mentioned, my Laurel does Spanish too, though you are not required to have the same persona or art or anything as your peer. I found that really helpful because like it was a way to find my people. Absolutely recommend her website for if you're interested at all in Spain. It's SpanishSeamstress.com. But being able to find somebody who is effectively the expert in your subject is a really wonderful way to get not just the information that you might need or places to start, but also somebody to bounce ideas off of when you're running up against something that may or may not make a lot of sense from a theoretical perspective. Use your library. They want to talk to you. Librarians are fabulous people. But also, I mean, use the literature, see if there are books, coming out. You can set Google alerts for topic areas, particularly for book releases. There are a lot of academic institutions that will put out like ads and stuff when they're about to release a new book. Absolutely recommend these 3 as like starting sources for persona development. So next we're going to go to the more outward presentation of persona, which is bringing persona to the SCA. And before I continue, do we have any questions so far?
All good in chat.
Sweet. Okay. So while we've been talking about how do you make your persona real for you, this is how you make persona real to everybody else. Full disclosure at this point, I'm a project manager, mundanely. Project planning and organization is how I approach pretty much everything in life. But when you can incorporate thinking about your persona into your projects from the outset, you end up making projects that are a lot more authentic to that persona. So if instead of saying, hey, I need a jacket for this event because I don't want to freeze, you open up with the question, okay, hey, I need a 15th century Spanish jacket. You end up with very, very different results than if I just say, okay, what is an easy jacket I can make to bring to an SCA event? You end up with something that is a lot more authentic to that persona. It can be a great way to open doors to research that you didn't even know existed. The general education part does kind of tie into all of those aspects that we just mentioned in the last section, which is the world around your persona matters as much as your persona does. So how your persona interacts with that world and what is going on in that world is another way that you can make the conscious choice to include your persona in anything you do in the SCA. It can help contextualize, again, things that you make, equipment that you choose, etc. So, visible choices that you can do to make your persona. Your garb is a really easy one, but what makes your garb specific and unique is something I really like to think about. So what makes a Norse persona from Sweden different than a Norse persona from Norway? How do you account for weather then versus weather now? Because those are very different things. The choices that you make in your garb are a very easy, very visible way to indicate persona. Presence, meaning what you do and interact with from an environmental perspective at an event. So your heraldry, your tents, your hospitality, ambiance, music. You can always choose these things in the style that your persona might have. So you can find a tent that makes the sense from a shape perspective for your persona. You can learn pieces of music or find recordings of music that match to your persona. There's a lot of ways that you can make you, outside of the things that are immediately attached to your body, a persona choice at events. Equipment, I'm going to call out separately, because this one's, there's some operative words in this question. Can you safely develop equipment for your art, science, and fighting style that is persona appropriate and appropriate to the rules of the SCA for equipment? We will talk a little bit more about a friend of mine and how he has handled that for his heavy kit. Do not sacrifice safety for persona accuracy. Please, nobody wants anybody getting hurt, but there are ways that you can account for some of those safety considerations with your equipment. The easiest one that I like to bring up here is I play late period Spain. If I want to go do archery, I can choose a longbow. I love to shoot longbows, but it's probably a bit more accurate if I choose a crossbow or an arquebus for some sort of ranged weapon, if that is what I want to do. And lastly, ESCA, which we are all a part of today, and all of us interact with on a very regular basis. If you use an online platform for your SCA experience, think social media, website, etc., sharing your research and your resources can really attract a lot of other people that are interested in the same thing. You can learn a lot from those people. So like I use my website to host all of my resources and research. And I try to tag and use relevant keywords so that anybody looking for medieval Spanish reenactment resources has an easier time finding them on my website. If you search for Hispano-Flemish garb, B's website is going to be the first thing you see. So we've got a lot going on here, but this is some really fun ways that you can bring persona into your SCA experience. We will start up here with the concept of research and cultural context. This image shows trade routes that connect large parts of the known world during the 16th century. I used it in a research project studying the spice trade and how the spices my persona cooks with would have made their way from where they come from to her home. Projects like this are great for giving a broader context to your persona, but are also really interesting to see how the world is interconnected. Below this, we have a badge. This is a necklace that I like to wear that shows the martyrdom of St. Lawrence. This is an SCA anthropology one here because my household is the Free Company of St. Lawrence debauched. St. Lawrence is not only a Spanish saint, which is great for me and my Spanish laurel, but also is the patron saint of my librarian, which B is, and chefs. And so my background is in sustainable agriculture. And a lot of our SCA household is very much food people. So getting this little call out to our household is a great way for me to incorporate that into my persona and incorporate my SCA into my persona. For me, this is a particularly great one because it allows me to connect with Catholicism in a way that I can't normally as a mundanely Jewish woman. Next is heraldry. This is my heraldry here. And heraldry is a great way to study and call out cultural norms in your heraldry. So like you can find heraldry that makes sense for your persona and what were the trends, what was popular. The nod to Spain in mine is the border. Fancy borders and stuff like that were really popular in Spanish heraldry. I did not really go with Spanish colors because green is my favorite color in the world, and I will always pick that first. But you could choose to do a, take a look at what the color trends and heraldry for your persona are and build your persona based on that. Up and to the right here, we have a copy of my apprenticeship contract. This is not the original. The original was typed out in English and printed and is lovely and is framed in a frame on my wall. But this copy is part of a project I did that allowed me to study what would my persona's handwriting have looked like. And also as signatures that my persona could have used. So it went on to inspire a recent project that studied humanism and education for women in Spain. And this project is also a great place to talk about language. For very few of us, our current native language would have been the same as our personas. I speak modern Spanish, and it is a great tool in my arsenal for exploring projects, but also research materials. Dipping your toe into understanding the language your persona interacts with is a great way to give some additional cultural context, but it can also be a really great way to engage with marginalized languages and communities. So the lingua franca for my persona would have been Castilian Spanish, but could she, what would have been the fashionable languages for her to know as an upper to or middle to upper class woman? Would she have interacted with more marginalized languages like Ladino or Arabic or Euskara or Catalana? How do those play into her interaction with Castilian Spanish? Here, we're going back to the crossbow concept. This is a great example of ways that you can incorporate your persona into your martial choices. While that is not my crossbow, Spain in my period would have tended more towards crossbows than longbows. So as much as I enjoy shooting those, my next bow purchase is probably going to be a crossbow. The other reason I like this picture is an attention to headwear. Headwear can make or break an outfit, and it feels sometimes like an afterthought for a lot of people making garb. But the right headwear can be a really great tool for calling out different cultural influences. Next up, we have this plate. This is one that I really like showing off because it is very, very clear that I have no future in pottery painting. A few friends of mine and I went to one of those paint your own ceramics places to have frozen custard milkshakes and paint feast gear, and I attempted to paint something inspired by a piece at the Met, and as we can tell, it did not go great. But it gave me a piece of feast gear and pottery that I can use that does call out my heraldry. That said, this is where I like to tie in this pottery down here, which is clearly painted by somebody with a lot more skill than I have. Buying for your persona is just as valuable as making for your persona, and sometimes more so. So this pattern is a Renactane pattern that is accurate to my persona, and it's great, and it means that I don't have to paint my own pottery and try to make that look like something that a kindergartner did not do. But learning how to shop smart for stuff like that can be really important. You don't need to make everything yourself here. Below that is a pair of calzas. This is a garment that most of you probably have never seen, but if you see me at an event, I promise you I am wearing. These are women's braids that are common in the period that my persona goes to, and they're super comfy. My garb both looks and feels better when you are wearing the period and persona correct body linens and undergarments. And it's, again, it's not something a lot of people see, but I can wear the dress that I'm wearing now, which is wool. I wear this in summer and I am just as comfortable in it then as I am in winter because it is constructed from the ground up as a way of interacting with my persona and trying to keep it accurate to what that outfit as a whole would have been. Next to these is a friend of mine. This is Baron Håkon from Ponte Alto, and this is one presentation of his heavy fighting kit. Håkon has put so much time and thought into making this kit, specifically because of his persona. Håkon plays a 9th century man from Uppsala, Sweden. And in all of this, he finds that for this persona, visible armor wouldn't have been a thing. But he still needs to stay safe when he's fighting. So he has built his kit in such a way and tailored his garments in such a way that he can completely hide his armor and still be safe and still feel like he is in persona when he's on the field. The other thing he did is this fabulous helmet. He put so much research into this specific helmet, and the design details, the construction details, it's It's absolutely phenomenal. If you ever get a chance to see it up close, I highly recommend it. The other important thing here to note, though, is while he's not wearing them in this photo, most of the time you will see him in modern shoes when he's fighting. And this is coming back to the please do not sacrifice your physical safety for period comfort or period accuracy. It is much more important that you don't break an ankle than your shoes look perfect. But he is a phenomenal example in a context that we don't often see a lot of thought go into persona. A lot of thought is put into comfort, a lot of thought is put into safety, and I don't want to minimize how much thought goes into heavy fighters kits, but Håkan has done a genuinely phenomenal job making this about his SCA experience as a whole, not just his time on the fighting field. And I love getting to highlight that for him. The last two pictures are pictures of food from a contemporaneous cookbook for my persona. Experiences like food, and I'm going to lean into food here instead of something less tangible like music or poetry, because that's what I know and what I do. These are a great way to get to know your persona. So they come from the same cookbook that inspired this project up here. And I started in this cookbook with figuring out spice blends and following those recipes and coming up with my own versions for those particular spice blends. And then expanded. So now I've got about 15-ish recipes from this cookbook that I have taken from period recipe to modern recipe that are usable. And they're delicious and they're fun and they're great ways to be a part of my persona's life. But you can also, again, do this with music, poetry, hobbies, your handcrafting, etc. So the big takeaways that I want you to gain from this class. Persona can be as much or as little as you make it, but the sky is truly the limit. Again, here for a good time is just as valid as persona as a literary construct. And however you choose to interact with your persona, I hope you have fun with it. But also, persona can be practical as well as theoretical. And what I mean by that is, persona is not just about how other people think about you in the SCA, it's about how you think about you in that context as well. And I sincerely hope that everybody who has taken this class has at least come away with one or two questions they want to ask themselves about how their persona may or may not be a part of their SCA experience in the future. So, thank you for listening. I am going to stop the recording now and we can do some question and answers.